And we're back. Just like that. Kia ora whānau.
Hello.
Hey, Chewy. How are you, man?
I am. You know, those days where you haven't really done anything, you can't really put your finger on it, but you're absolutely wiped out.
Yeah.
That is me today. I am one sleepy potato.
A fried potato, a cooked potato. How does it go?
Oh, I'm not cooked. I'm not one
Ginger?
of them. I didn't
Ginger
vote
potato?
for New Zealand Loyal. Who, by the way,
Yeah.
if you float in those social media circles and you just wondered how it's going for the people that supported Liz Gunn and New Zealand Loyal, it's not going good.
Why? What's happening?
They are turning on each other. It is
really?
amazing.
Of course. What happens in any kind of group like that who decides about the other is eventually all the others are no longer relevant, so they turn on each other and they become the others.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Talk about, when they say, the left will eat itself. No, these guys are fucking, it's a buffet. And it's delightful.
Good to
I
hear.
love it.
Good to hear. I'm looking at the chat, been going crazy for a little while, and I have to say thank you to Daniel. Daniel made this comment, can't wait to have the boys back after a tediously small and clean-shaven long weekend. Because now we do, like last year we used to do 5 nights a week, but there was like 3 or 4 people who used to do it. It wasn't just me and Chewy. Well, it was just me, but it was me and 2 or 3 others as well. That was how we kind of got through the 5 nights. And this year we've kind of gone to 4 nights at 9 o'clock. Hello, we're here. But yeah, it's funny. It's weird having 4 nights off in a row. It does feel a bit bizarre. It feels like it's a long time since we've been on. I think a part of that is there's so much happening in the news cycle. Have you seen all the news around? We're not really doing this tonight. All the news around Donald Trump's lawyers, all Donald Trump's co-accused are all pleading guilty, flipping and say they're going to testify against him, including his lawyers. And also, it's just hilarious.
Oh, that's a shame.
It's just hilarious.
I did see today his latest public comment is that he's never been indicted.
Right.
Which is interesting considering the 4 indictments that he's got.
Yeah. 91 felonies he's up on or something like that. Outrageous. I've had a very interesting weekend. I've had sickness in the house, not to me, but to one of the people in the house who went to a wedding on Saturday night. And by Sunday night, there was a lot of sickness from all the people that it seems were at that wedding. I wasn't there. And yeah. And so that's been going on a little bit around the place. But within the whole weekend, as I sometimes do on I was going to say Monday, but the first day of the week, I want to share with you a movie that I saw, which is currently on Netflix, which I really enjoyed. It's called Free State of Jones.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot when it came out.
Seen it?
Yep.
It's one of those. So Matthew McConaughey plays the southern states of America, the Confederation soldier, who basically, what do you call it when you run away from war? You're disabled, deserter, that'll do, who deserts from war and then kind of starts fighting against everyone, the North and the South. They don't use that phrase, but somewhere within the movie, they talk about the enemy of my enemy as my friend. And they talk about the North and them being against the same people who are the South. And basically wants to treat all men equally and wants to, help free the slaves, and really interesting movie. It's got pretty poor ratings on Rotten Tomato. I saw there was quite a poor rating, but I really enjoyed it.
It reviewed poorly when it came out, and it continues to get poor reviews. But it's one of those ones that I really can't put my finger on why. Like it's a good movie. It's an interest. Like it's based on something that actually happened. It's an interesting piece of history when you look it up. I can't. It's got some pacing issues, but nothing critical. I thought it was a good movie. Yeah. I went to see a fucking great movie other day. Uproar. which is in the cinemas at the moment. It's the movie that was filmed here in Dunedin around the Springbok protests, the 81 Springbok Tour protests. Got Julian Dennison in it. And it is phenomenal. Like, really, really good acting, really, really good characters. Showcases Dunedin quite well, I think. And the treat for me was they filmed a scene in the street pretty much right outside the first house I had here in Dunedin.
Very cool.
So that's my claim to fame, that I lived in the house that you can briefly see in the first half of the movie. But I totally recommend it. It gave me the wet eyes and the feel, and that is an accomplishment, I tell you what. But I think just a really good study on, standing up for what you believe in, doesn't matter what you're risking. Yeah, no, really solid movie.
Now, as people know, we're pretty shithouse at this whole kind of making product content stuff, so we haven't set any of this up. But I'm interested, Chewy, to flow from what you've just said, because actually our conversation tonight, we're going to talk about Gaza and Israel a couple of times. There's a New Zealand relation to it, and we're going to talk about some other comments you made on it. Mm-hmm. We have talked, and you have talked about various, and also the treaty tribunal, about the interracial issues that come on board with the Gaza situation, but also the treaty referendum turning into a 1981. And you were saying that Uproar, I don't know too much about Uproar, was based around the Springbok tour. Did you get any vibes of stuff going on in the world at the moment that kind of felt relatable to the movie you were watching in that Uproar?
Like, certainly when we're talking about the referendum, and like the Springbok tour becomes one of those things that's almost semi-mythical. There's always like stories and narratives that have always been around it, and because I watched it, I revisited it. There's a couple of really good short sort of documentaries and stuff like that on YouTube about it, that are locally produced, that really dive into it. And I think the movie reflected it really well, and I think it's still very relevant today, that you can be a white liberal person that agrees with race relations and that sort of thing, and you want to do something about it, and whether intentional or not, you center it on yourself.
Right.
So there's the scene where they're organizing for the protest, and it's being led by a white woman, and she's involving a white man, and they're discussing this chant that they're going to do. And it's all very performance based and that sort of thing. And there's an older Maori woman sitting in the front row, and she sort of just asks some questions of like, do you know what you're saying in that chant? Do you know the words? Does it mean anything? And then there's this conversation about, well, we're angry about this because it relates to us Maori people here in New Zealand. Have you considered that? And I'm just like, I have been involved in a few protests and that sort of thing, and I've seen that play out live.
Right.
Where you're like, well, I'm not part of the problem because I'm organizing this thing, but you're also speaking over people that maybe should be further to the front. And it's kind of just that nice little reminder that sometimes it's good to step back, that you don't need to lead. Maybe it's better to let someone else lead. And this is an absolute bombshell line for me that came out in it, because there was a younger character that was very angry about this whole thing. And basically they were saying, look, we're cool. Like, New Zealand's not like South Africa. You need to get over being angry about that because our race relations are better. And then one of the other characters goes, no, you can't get over something when you're still going through it. And I thought that was a fucking great line. Because we haven't solved it. No, we've solved it. No. We might be better or worse than some other comparable discussion, some other country's experience. But that doesn't mean that you should just sit down and be thankful for what you've got. You can always push for better. Yeah. So I thought it was really, really good in how it handled that. And I think if it does come to something like, I saw a bit of it around the counter protest for Julian Batchelor, as the talk to white people, Pākehā, that might feel a little bit emboldened because nothing bad really happens to us, right? But if we kick off something, it's not going to be us paying the price.
Yeah.
You
are
let someone
aware
else lead.
You are aware that there's two Pākehā blokes sitting here talking about all of this as well.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And look, we're guilty of it. And from time to time, people have given us a wee check on it, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes you've got to put your ego in the back seat a little bit and go, oh yeah, am I angry because I'm being told off? Am I being told off for good reason? But yeah, it's standing aside and let someone else lead from time. You do just as much heavy lifting by being that support.
Yeah, but
and you do by being the leader at the front.
And what often leading from the back is the best place to do it from. I mean, speaking of, one of the things we do is obviously people, this, we get people on board. We bring guests in who have experiences and lives that we don't have to explain what's going on in the world. And speaking of that tonight, not that it's a race issue necessarily. Well, it's not a race issue. Emeritus Professor Jonathan Boston is joining us in a pre-recorded conversation from this evening. He is from the School of Government at Victoria University, School of Government. And he has a chat with me from this afternoon about ACT's plans to get rid of 15,000 bureaucrats, public servants. So we are. So he's been in the press over the weekend talking about that. He was happy to talk to us today. So we'll put that up towards the end of the show. And because Chewy is a tired potato, maybe you can cut out early. Maybe we can cut it. You can cut out early while I play the pre-record. Really interesting chat as well. And also, it's a funny old show tonight actually, because we're talking kind of Israel, Gaza, and ACT in almost all of the segments. They all kind of tie into each other somehow to another. So, yeah. Light-hearted, funny one tonight, eh, Chewy? Gaza, Israel.
It depends. Are we deploying David Seymour to Gaza to solve it?
I believe so.
Some sort of hostage trade or something?
Yeah. You can have him and we'll give you $1 million as well, and you can keep him. That's about it. Let's just say this as well. If you ordered some merch last week, because obviously of the long weekend, it'll probably take a day longer to get to me, which probably means it'll get to me on Wednesday or Thursday. It normally gets to me on Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'll have it out the door the day it gets in. So you'll probably see it start of next week, end of this week. Thank you for those who purchased some merch last week. This is our drop for this month. We've got the regular old BHN gear there, and we've also got our thematic one for this month, which is the bottom feeder gear. You can get bottom feeder gear in rust or in tan or in black with white as well. And that, of course, is a reference to the infamous Mr. Luxon making comments about, bottom feeders. So if you are a bottom feeder or you want to support us bottom feeders, welcome to get some merch, bhnshop.nz. Right, well, let's get into it, shall we? Because we've got 4 topics today and we don't want to go through forevermore. It was a band, wasn't it, Evermore? Am I right?
Yeah.
I need to get my notes. I threw them on the floor. I don't know why.
Why'd you do that?
Why do I need to get my notes?
Yeah, well, why'd you throw them on the floor?
Because I was a bit pissy with something. I went, and chucked my toys. Right, let's have a look at, I thought we'd better start on a high. So let's have we'll go to the monarchy. Well, this is Chewy's monarchy, actually, to have a chat with the Queen Chloe. Interesting chat about, and this is to do with Israel and Gaza a little bit, because there was a chat going on the AM show this morning between David Seymour and Chloe about what should New Zealand be doing about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And one of the interesting perspectives or questions is, because we have a caretaker government, right? So still right now, the Labour Party is in charge, right? But they're in a caretaker status because the new government has not been formed yet. So when something like this happens, a world event happens, and you have a caretaker government that probably does have the ability to pass laws, but it's pretty poor form to do it. Probably as the caretaker prime minister, Hipkins could get up and say something, but as he's just lost an election, it's probably poor form. What do we do in these sorts of situations when there's a caretaker government and when there is an event like this that needs to be addressed? This is what the conversation starts about, and we'll follow through for a couple more bits and bobs about that as well.
Look, I mean, the Greens' position is incredibly clear, as it has been on this issue for a really long time. What we have here in the situation in Gaza in particular is, as I understand it, with the most up-to-date news, that approximately 50% of the homes of those civilians have been bombed. We have a humanitarian crisis on our hands, and we've also seen, as of last week, that the United States voted down a resolution for a humanitarian ceasefire. So I do think that there is a role for all political parties, at the very least, to come together, and we could potentially do this outside of the formation of the government, to say that we have consensus on the need for there to be a call for a ceasefire.
Yeah, do you support calls for a ceasefire, David?
Well, I think obviously anything that ends the violence and the suffering would be fantastic for those people right now. But I think we've also got to be a bit...
But, fuck's sake.
No, and you're right, and I did want to point this out really clearly. I was listening to a communication expert once, and they said, and I don't actually agree 100% with them, but it's an interesting way to think about it. When someone says the word but, what they're saying is, ignore everything I've just said, I'm about to make my point. Right,
yes,
so that's what the word
absolutely.
but means. So Seymour does it twice, and listen to what he says after the word but. There's one in this instance, and there's another question, there's another time he says it.
Violence and the suffering would be fantastic for those people right now. But I think we've also got to be a bit careful of trying to insert ourselves and our own issues into this. I mean, this is a major conflict that's been going on, some people would argue, for 2,000 years. I don't think whether or not New Zealand has a caretaker government or a proper government, or what we think about it, is number one on their minds, frankly. I think what is important is that New Zealand plays the best role that it can, and yes, you know, what we can do practically that would help is not sit here and pontificate should there be a ceasefire. It's vastly complex. What we can do is... I
mean, why do you ask the question, should there be a ceasefire? We're pontificating on should there be a ceasefire. No, there should be a ceasefire. Like on either side, both sides, there should be a ceasefire. But Seymour's sitting there going, we can pontificate on should there be... No, we just say, yes, there should be a ceasefire, if for no other reason to save innocent lives, not to necessarily put your stamp on one side or the other, just to stop innocent people from dying. So, yeah, there should be a ceasefire. It's not that difficult to say that, Mr. Seymour.
Actually make sure that New Zealand is doing its bit, providing the aid that it can afford, doing it efficiently and rapidly. You know, that's the practical thing that we can do.
I guess, but if there are children being killed, shouldn't we just as a baseline have a rule that we say?
Okay. Sorry to interrupt again, but how much of a softball pitch is this? Okay, if children are dying needlessly, is that enough of a time to get involved in saying let's just use that? Forget all the political side of things. Forget all the geopolitical issues in the region. Forget the history of the years of conflict. Let's just focus on the children dying. Isn't that enough for us to get involved?
He doesn't even mention which children, which side, which is absolutely perfect. Children are dying. Should we have a ceasefire?
So let's see. Let's see what Mr. Seymour.
That's a real head scratcher.
Yeah. Well, how do we deal with children dying?
Shouldn't we just as a baseline have a rule that we say when that's happening, please, could you stop?
Well, of course we should. But again, you know, I think that oversimplifies what's happened here. I mean, you've had a terrorist organisation that has attacked a bunch of people, done exactly that, that now uses civilians as a human shield, which means that it's very difficult for the Israelis to go after the terrorists that have attacked them. And it would be easy to say, well, just stop. But as I say, this has been going on arguably for 2,000 years. So, I mean, again, I think it's very easy for us to sit here and say, oh, well, obviously this is the right thing. You know, we've got to respect exactly how difficult this is, and what's really going on there is a lot bigger than what we understand.
We also do have to respect our long-standing legacy of upholding the international rules-based system, and here we also have a situation where, you know, the reporters from those who operate within agencies in the United Nations have made it abundantly clear that what we are witnessing in some of the most egregious instances are war crimes, with the likes of collective punishment being rained down upon Gazans who are currently in occupied Palestinian territories. And there is a role for New Zealand to play, and I'd say for the thousands of New Zealanders who have marched all across the country this past weekend, there is a role for politicians to respond and to show that leadership as well.
All right.
Oh my gosh. It's kind of like you get fed the bitterest, tasting bitter. Oh God, tastes so bitter on your when Seymour speaks, and then Chloe comes out and drops some truth and uses some research and speaks eloquently, and you're like, oh, that's the food I want to be ingesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, Seymour is someone that is most likely going to be part of whatever government forms. And we shouldn't be involved in the area. We shouldn't have anything to do with that shit show, should we? As we've done for 40 years as part of a UN mission in the Sinai, making sure that the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt stays together. The man doesn't know where we are.
And just to reference back to that idea of the word but, I wrote it down. I wrote down the themes of what he said. He said but twice. And the first time he said but, he finished it by saying, we should be careful to insert ourselves. Now, if there is any politician in New Zealand that's fucking inserting him or herself into more of New Zealand's private business, it would be David Seymour, happy to insert himself, his party, his policies into other people's lives. But he wants to be careful not to insert ourselves into the Middle East. That was his first but. And the second but was he didn't want to oversimplify the idea of children dying. You don't want to oversimplify that one there, David. You fuck knuckle.
Also, apparently, quite hard to draw a line between a terrorist organization and children. I have a concern for someone that cannot determine the difference. Maybe he has such a problem with working out what a terrorist is because so many of his supporters seem to not have a problem with what happened in Christchurch. Is that too far? I don't know.
Whoa, maybe. Maybe. Hey, there's something else I want to bring up about the situation, because we've done 2 nights where we've talked about this. On Wednesday night, we had the alternate Jewish voices on, and we were saying on that show it seemed more likely than not that the rocket came from Israel, that impacted around the hospital. And then on Thursday night, we brought you a whole bunch of information. That was a lot of commentators saying it looks like it's come more from the Gaza side. And because there are things like, and I understand that theory, because, you know, you watch on the news the bombing of buildings, and when Israel hits a building with a missile, it just pancakes, and the hospital hasn't. So I get all that, but we're still kind of sitting there going, we just want to bring you the information. There's more information, or at least another perspective that's come out, and it's from forensic architecture. Now, forensic architecture are I'll give you the exact quote of what they are, but they're a university group who basically look at architectural issues around the world when it comes to events like this to see how it happened and what happened. In fact, Chewie, while I'm talking and showing this, do you want to just bring up Forensic Architecture's website, and you can read the about thing out to us, just to give everyone a heads up as to who exactly they are. And they've said, it came out over the weekend, preliminary analysis by Forensic Architecture into the hospital blast in Gaza casts significant doubt on IOF claims that the source of the deadly explosion was a Palestinian-fired rocket traveling west to east. They say 3D analysis shows patterns of radial fragmentation on the southwest side of the impact crater, as well as a shallow channel leading into the crater from the northeast. Such patterns indicate a likely projectile trajectory from the northeast regions. They say in reviewing our analysis, investigators and explosive weapons expert Cobb Smith agrees that fragmentation patterns may indicate that the projectile came from the northeast, the direction of the Israel-controlled side of Gaza perimeter, and not from the west as claimed by the IOF. And goes on. Our Cobb Smith analysis of the crater size suggests a munition larger than, e.g. a Spike or Hellfire missile commonly used by IOF drones. It is more consistent with the impact marks from an artillery shell, but without additional material evidence, we cannot make a definitive assessment. So they're still not, they're still holding back a bit. And one more, this image taken by John Moore in Ukraine in 2022 shows the directionality of fragmentation of an artillery shell compared to the crater at the site. Should I just open that up? Maybe I just open that. I haven't opened this up, so we'll have to see what comes out. There you go. So that's an artillery shell. It's quite a small crater. I guess that's what they're saying. And if you'd like to own that for yourself, it's only 650 New Zealand dollars. So look, as we said to you on Thursday, we'll continue to bring you information. I know that after BBC and others reported last week that it looks like it's come from inside Gaza, that now appears to be the gospel truth, whereas both Chewy and I were like, well, we'll wait and see what else comes out. More analysis has come out saying that looks like it came from the northeast, which is where Israel sends their weapons from. Did you bring up that site, Chewy? Did you get the exactly on who FA are?
Is that what you're looking for there?
I guess so.
Forensic Architecture is a research agency based at Goldsmiths, University of London, investigating human rights violations, including violence committed by states, police forces, militaries, and corporations. We work in partnership with institutions across civil society, from grassroots activists and legal teams to international NGOs and media organizations, to carry out investigations with and on behalf of communities and individuals affected by conflict, police brutality, border regimes, and environmental violence. So, yeah,
that's their bag.
Pretty thorough.
It's what they're into. Now, again, I mean, not that our little number one news rated show is going to take a hard and fast stand on this. Well, when I say we, I'm not, because we still don't know all the facts and figures, but I just think that at the moment, what I would be saying to people is, I don't think you can say definitively one or the other. I think that's probably a fair place. And I'm not making that statement to fence it. I'm making that statement because I am an honest actor, and I will say it seems unclear, but there are quality research groups like FA out there saying it's coming from Israel, and there are other groups like the BBC who have said it seems like it comes from within. I guess the other thing you have to realise is the BBC, though, is also taking other people's information and analysing it, whereas FA have done the investigation themselves. I'm not putting more weight in with the FA, but we'll see what happens more and more and keep bringing it to you, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to go in and do a fucking CSI in an active war zone. So, yeah, I doubt we'll ever get a definitive answer on it ever, because people are hiding what happened. Nobody's going to stand up and go, yeah, I fired that shell. We're just not going to know.
Yeah. All right. But can I just say this as well? We missed this. I didn't miss it, but we put it earlier. There wasn't a specific question, but a big thanks to Super Chat from Peter. Peter King just fired us $5. Late fee. I didn't make it until 8:59. If you're on time, you're late. So, Peter obviously says that everyone needs to be here well before 9 o'clock to be on time. Thank you, Peter, for the super chat. We appreciate the contribution. Speaking of contributions, I think we said prior to the election that we'd start talking to you guys about the future of BHN. And don't panic, baby birds. We're not making any decisions right now, but I think what Chewy and I are going to do at some stage this week is have a sit down and a bit of a plan out, and probably early to mid next week, I think we're going to bring you a pretty big, hairy, audacious idea. And just to talk through the future of BHN. We've built, I've stopped saying we're building a community, Chewy, and I now tell people we've built a community. You know, the community that we've built can continue to grow into a different community.
I'm terrible at keeping secrets, Pat. We're opening a food truck.
We're gonna do like Mr. Beast and start selling big hairy news burgers all over New Zealand.
Big hairy burgers. I see no problem with that naming or the food that we're choosing.
Gareth has outed us already. Good Lord. I've got a good set of feet on me, and Chewy's got a hairy back, and that's what that's going to be. We're going to try and corner the market and feet and hairy backs. All right. I know it's Tuesday, so this kind of story is a little bit a few days ago, but from the weekend. It's from the Nation show. I thought there was a really interesting point. Like I said, tonight's show kind of links to either Gaza or ACT kind of all the way through. It wasn't a plan. It's just how the news has fallen tonight. Oh, I don't mind that one either. Someone just mentioned it on there. What about that? They released the hairy energy drink.
Oh, remember that. The taurine and caffeine's great. I'm awake for days, but I have to pick hair out of my teeth every time.
I was watching over the weekend, because I can't not, News Hub Nation, and journalist Annabelle Lee-Mather, Annabelle Lee-Mather, she's also part of Ngāi Tahu, I believe, so Māori journalist, was sharing some thoughts in News Hub Nation about the treaty referendum and what her perspective is on why she thinks it'll be hard for ACT to let go of the treaty referendum. I think there's some quite insightful thoughts here, and I want to share it with you.
You see this landing?
Well, I think New Zealanders may not be interested in it, but ACT and its donors are. And so I don't think that this is an issue that Seymour will be willing to give away quickly. People have invested in him and in his campaign.
So really careful, really important to hear that. People have invested in David Seymour and they've invested in his campaign. And she said earlier, ACT's donors are interested in the treaty referendum. Because the question that came before that, I probably should have played it from Rebecca, was New Zealand's not that interested in this. Our research shows that. And Annabelle says, but ACT is and their donors are. And those donors have put money into David Seymour and his campaign. So that's the rationale behind it.
These are people that are just very passionate and are happy to give away $50,000 with no expectation of any reach around or anything like that. You're not suggesting that they've given that money in the expectations of access to a government minister or having favourable terms that might affect their business or investments, are you, Patrick?
Sorry,
Pat?
I just can't get past the word reach around in your conversation there, Chewy. I'm sorry. That was.
Thank you. I'm glad that that's your takeaway.
Oh my God. Okay, we'll keep going with Annabelle.
Seymour will be willing to give away quickly. People have invested in him and in his campaign. There's important issues. I think it's probably part of a wider agenda to erode Māori rights, you know, when it comes to issues and resources like water, like mining, and this is a first step in that. And his supporters and his donors are going to want bang for their buck, so I imagine he'll be negotiating very hard over this.
Yeah, and
So they want bang for their buck. They want a return on the money they've spent. So she's literally saying, and this is her opinion, but I like it. Well, I don't like the subject matter of it, but I like the position, is that the return they're looking for is subjugating Māori. That's what I hear, Chewy. The return that the ACT sponsors and supporters are looking for is to subjugate Māori.
Yikes. Yep.
And they'll do it.
Mean,
step one of the 1,000-mile journey will be the referendum. That's what I hear.
It's not fucking out the gate. There's been people that have been very, very strong supporters of ACT in the past that have been out and out proud racist white supremacists, happy to describe themselves as such. So yeah, why wouldn't that be the case? Ugh.
I just thought it was a really good perspective. I mean, as we were saying earlier today, just within the last half hour, you know, we bring a different perspective than someone from Ngāi Tahu who's involved in the media. This is her perspective. If we can't get people in the show as guests to share their perspective, we'll always try and bring it to you like we've done right now. I'm going to play a little bit more of this because I do go on from that conversation to ask another question about Luxon around the government that's going to be formed as well.
It's something that he's campaigned on. He will say, you know, he has a mandate for that too. I want to talk a little bit about the sea change in Christopher Luxon this week, you know, because he is stepping into, you've talked about this a little bit, Peter, but he's stepping into being a prime minister now from being a CEO and dealing with that daily scrutiny, reporters every day asking you pesky questions. It's very different, isn't it, from perhaps being able to put out your video statements, which I know, you know, the CEOs are very keen on, Dalipa.
Yeah, well, you know, if we think of these coalition negotiations, Luxon made references to mergers and acquisitions as being a kind of precedent. If you think from a, you know, the best corporate negotiators will always tell you what they're trying to go for is, you know, enlarging the pie, some kind of solution, a creative solution that actually makes everybody sort of better off. Whereas typically in these coalition negotiations, what we've often seen is, you know, a lot of horse trading. You know, we want X policies, how much do we get, how many ministries do we get? And so I think, you know, reading charitably into what he said, I think he's trying to approach things that way. But it's a very different situation because, you know, the public of New Zealand, even your party members, they're not your, you know, and the media and, you know, the media and the public who find out about things through them, they're more like your shareholders than just the media sitting off the side reporting things in an industry context for some people who may or may not be investing in a company or trying to make decisions based on what might be happening with the company or might not be happening with the company. And people from the business sector who go into politics often always say there's nothing quite like it, because they're very different environments. You have a lot more public scrutiny. You don't have media. Things that are not a big deal if you're a company CEO and are suddenly a big deal if you're the leader of a country.
Yeah, well,
So there you go. The obvious movement from Luxon to try, and he's doing it now with the way they're negotiating. The funny thing is he's doing it the way they're negotiating the contracts around coalition, but ACT and New Zealand First aren't. David Seymour is everywhere at the moment, talking to anyone at the moment. And whilst he can't talk so much about coalition because he doesn't know yet, he's everywhere. I saw something today where he hasn't yet talked to Winston Peters, though. That conversation has not happened yet. He hasn't spoken to Winston since it actually went. Just a foreshadowing of a fantastically well-functioning government that's going to come, isn't it?
It's weird though, right? Luxon's gone fishing. I assume Winston's gone fishing in a different part of the ocean. And Seymour's running around basically saying it without saying it that he's going to be a cabinet minister. It's mental. Like it is literally mental.
The conversation about running New Zealand as a business comes up with our guest, Professor Jonathan Boston, because that's a part of what he talks about as well. And we actually are going to play some Seymour audio to him. So Jonathan Boston has been writing about this over the past few days specifically. And on a particular radio show this morning, David Seymour responded to some of the things Jonathan Boston has said. So I'd play Jonathan Boston some of the comments from Seymour and he responds to them. So, and one of the things is about, Seymour says in this conversation, that's not what businesses do. I'm like, you're not fucking running a business. You're running a country. It's not the same thing, you big dingus. Anyway, that's just a little preview of what's going to come up with Professor Boston. Yes, Stewie.
I have an ACT-related tangent. It's not directly related to what we're talking about, but it is somewhat of a story in development over the last couple of days. What's the best way to start with this?
They came for the billboard. Is that what it was?
No, they didn't come for the billboard. It's still here. Let's start with a little bit of meet your candidate. Christchurch Central, Matthew Fiskin.
Yep.
I am a former ACT Party youth MP who represented Nicole McKee MP at Youth Parliament in 2022. I sit on the ACT Region 8 Committee and the Young ACT Canterbury Committee, where I'm studying towards an LLB and BA in Political Science and Strategic Communication. I also sit on the committee for Sporting Shooters Association of New Zealand. I grew up in Invercargill. I attended Verdon College before moving to Christchurch to start my degree in 2022, where I now work as an RA in one of the UC halls.
I just pause for a second. We're not going to talk about something where information hasn't been released to the public yet, are we?
No, we're talking about two completely unrelated things.
Okay, good. Just thought I'd check for your tangent.
Certainly don't. He's an RA at University of Canterbury. It has probably absolutely nothing to do with us.
Okay. So what's that second story you've got there with no relation whatsoever?
University of Canterbury student known for having pro-gun views has been arrested and charged after armed police found weapons and ammunition in an early morning raid. Police were called to the, I can't pronounce that, student accommodation in Ilam just after 2 a.m. on Thursday, October 19th. Police found and seized ammunition and weapons. It's believed that they were in the man's hostel room. The 20-year-old was taken into custody and then taken to hospital to be assessed for treatment. My involvement in the ACT Party, this is again unrelated. My involvement in the ACT Party began to my opposition to rushed firearms legislation in 2019, preventing me from competing in certain divisions of my sport. Unrelated. I just think it's interesting.
I was just Googling while we're talking name suppression, yada yada. I don't see anything that's come up.
No,
not that that's related to anything you're talking about. I'm just double. No, I was checking. I had a thought, just thinking about something else in my head.
No, absolutely not. The student was known for having pro-gun views, including opposing law reforms made following the March 15 terror attack in Christchurch. Unrelated. Just something. Just act things.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Sure. I think that tangent is paused.
Unrelated.
Paused for now.
Unrelated tangent.
Just two stories. I don't even know why I brought them up.
Let's get into something that's slightly less awkward. Israel and Gaza, in that conversation we were just having.
Yeah, much safer topic. You're right.
Much safer topic than that one. Right, let's have a look. This is actually Cenk Uyger. Cenk Uyger is an interesting character, right? Most of us know him from the Young Turks. He's outed himself as a presidential nominee this time around. Utter lunacy, makes no sense at all, isn't going to achieve anything. Don't know if it's a grift, don't know. Just utter lunacy. I mean, he basically has said he wants to get into the Democratic runnings. Well, first of all, he's born in Turkey, so he's ineligible, but never mind. He wants to get into the runnings to actually force other people to get in. But for him to get into the runnings, he then has to get a certain number or a certain percentage in the polls to make an effect to get other people to run alongside him, and that doesn't give them enough time to get into the running. So it's all kind of pointless. And he said he'll take super PAC money while he runs a super PAC to try and get money out of politics. And it's all just a bit bizarre, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, he was on Piers Morgan.
Weird.
Yeah, and TYT has always called themselves the home of the progressives. And I think that there will be lots of people out there today who would say that might have been the case in 2015, but it's not quite so much the case today. I think that's fair criticism. But Cenk still, floats his progressive name badge. And this is actually sounding quite negative. It's not negative towards Cenk at all. It's just a bit of just a little bit of background to who he is in case people weren't aware. So they're the biggest progressive, liberal, left-wing YouTube channel news YouTube channel. They've got about 5 million subscribers, and they do shows every day. They do a raft of other shows. They took $20 million of capital off someone, which most people say was the beginning of the end for them, because then they became corporate almost immediately. But that's where they are now. And so anyway, Cenk's also just written a book. Some say that might be related to his presidential run. Might be. I don't know. He went on Piers Morgan to talk about Israel and Gaza. And his perspective that he wanted to share was particularly about how the media are responding to this and looking at what's happening for people in Gaza and what Israel is doing to them. Now, he does completely make it clear that what Hamas is doing, spit on them, not interested in them, terrorists as well. But he's very, very, very much focused on the people of Gaza. He's very focused on how the mainstream media is reporting what's going on over there. And I thought we might play a couple of quick clips about this. So here's Cenk Uyger. With Cenk, when he's getting more and more passionate, it just gets louder and louder and louder. This happens in this. If there was a meter of noise, it would slowly go up like this, which is fine. Here's Cenk.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I didn't expect the framing that you put on this segment, and it's framing like that. That's disgusting. So I don't see what this has anything to do with anti-Semitism. I formed Young Turks and TYT with two Jewish friends who are some of my friends growing up. We've known each other and been brothers for over 40 years now. So I think what Hamas did is disgusting. I cry for those Israeli innocent civilians. But do I see you guys crying for Palestinians? I mean, Chris Christie was just on here treating it like it's no big deal because Palestinian lives don't matter. I think the real bigotry here is saying that Palestinians, we can kill 3 times as many of them already. And this is the appetizer. Netanyahu and his barbaric government have not even started the entree of murder and death and mayhem they're about to do. And that's somehow okay, killing 3 times as many Palestinian civilians, let alone the occupation, which is bigotry by definition. We say that everyone in the world can defend themselves, can have their own state, can have sovereignty, except the Palestinians. And the reasoning behind that is the Palestinians are what? They're what? The idea is that they are savages and that Muslims are too violent and cannot control themselves. So they must be occupied for 56 brutal, disgusting years. So I've had enough of the bigotry against Muslims and Palestinians, and I need you to speak out against that instead of covering every outrageous, atrocious action of the right-wing government of Israel and going, oh, it's anti-Semitism. No, and there is global anti-Semitism. There's anti-Semitism here in this country. 2 synagogues were shot up, Pittsburgh and in Southern California. We fight against that all the time. But then whenever Israel is criticized, people go, oh, no, it's anti-Semitism. No, there's real anti-Semitism.
Okay, Jack, let me respond.
Instead of attacking that, all you guys ever do is hide behind the veil of anti-Semitism. Do you know why Palestinians might not like Israelis? Because they've been oppressed for 56 straight years.
There we go. There's part one, Chewy. I mean, lots of people in the chat saying Cenk did well. Not much to complain about there. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's absolutely right. You see it, like people are rightly scared of being cast as anti-Semitic or you know that sort of thing. But you have to separate the state from the people. In this case, right? We're looking at a right-wing government. Yep. You're looking at the state actions. You know, and there, like any country, there will be citizens that support it and citizens that don't. There will be Jewish people abroad that support it and those that don't. We've spoken to some that don't.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I don't think criticism of the state of Israel and its government and the actions of its military is an anti-Semitic thing.
But what he's saying, what he's saying is true. If I can step away a little bit from the Israel-Gaza conflict at the moment, that's actually one of the things that's true that's happening in society today. You know, I've used this example many times before of Antifa going through a part of Portland and having 2 elderly people holding up an American flag. And all these guys from Antifa were going, racist, you're racist, you're racist. And I'm like, well, those old people may or may not be racist, but the metric to know that is not holding an American flag. You know, the words that we're using at the moment, I think in lots of instances, you know, homophobe, you know, transphobe, racist, Nazi, you know, all these words aren't getting used in 2023 accurately many of the times. And the unfortunate thing about that is then when they're actually, there's an appropriate, accurate time to use them, like, for example, Posey Parker's march in Melbourne, they've lost some of their value because those on the right can then go, they call everyone Nazis. It's like, no, they're actual, you know, they're actual Nazis. That's the same with anti-Semitism. I've experienced it. There is someone who thinks I'm an anti-Semite because we had Byron Clark on the show. That's the only reason. That's the only reason, right? And that's their reason for thinking that I'm anti-Semitic or the show is anti-Semitic. So it's whether I was or I wasn't, and I'm not, that's not a metric to decide those sorts of things. And so I agree with Cenk. Now, because I think that lots of times people do hide behind those, and then you don't want to get labeled with that, right? So the group now won't criticize Israel in this instance if it's legitimate, criticism, for fear of being labeled that. And forget some anti-Semitic, you know, whatever it is, racist or homophobic or capitalist or socialist or whatever the label is. I mean, we're everything from communists to socialists to Marxists to leftists to, you know, we get called everything.
I'm running out of flags and membership cards.
But I also wanted to show you an example of sort of what Cenk's rallying against. And this is a clip from CNN. And this is a clip with a guy who is a former brigadier general who stands on the set and he actually condones war crimes. So this guy here, Stephen Anderson, he is a former brigadier general, okay? And even though the host pushes back, it's a bit like, but is that what you're saying? It's like there's no sort of hard line, you can't say that. And part of that in America, I think, is this patriotic table. You know, I'm a patriot. That's been taken by the right, and they've relabeled it. And if you question anything, all of a sudden you're unpatriotic. And then that's a label you don't want to be called, so people are less likely to push back. So you ever listen to what this ex-brigadier general says, and then hear what the host says in response, which is fine, but how would you respond to someone saying, war crimes from time to time, they have to happen? Paraphrased. Have a listen.
I think what they need to do is encircle it. They need to continue to apply the pressure of the brigade, this blockade that they've established. The people are going to suffer, but they're going to come up on the net and they're going to say, look, get us out of here.
But does that mean, does that mean starve the Palestinian people, continue to, because they will be so hungry and will be so desperate for water and medicine that then they will give up Hamas?
It sounds callous, but I mean, this is a war.
There you go. Sounds callous, committing war crimes, but this is a war. Now that's where the clip cut off. I got that from a secondary place, not from CNN. But there was no hard pushback, just none. So that's an example, I think, of what Cenk is saying with you guys, the media, you guys. Now, of course, Piers Morgan went, I'm not one of those guys. But in general, that's what he's saying, because if you push back against if you were correct and you came out and said, think about it. There was, I can remember doing talkback after 9/11, right? And then there was a mosque going to be built in Times Square or just down the road from there.
I remember that. Yeah.
And that was the appropriate and correct thing to do. They were allowed to. You have freedom of religion. You can put that anywhere you want. But it was very dangerous for politicians and stuff to support that because it wasn't the popular view. So they didn't, and it didn't get built there. So the right thing to do sometimes when there's public pressure, people won't do it. And I don't know in the instance of Israel and Gaza right now, probably for either side, what's the right thing to do, what's the right thing to say. But people won't, because they'll be like, your butthole clenches. It's just a bit too, I don't know. I'd rather, it's like Michael Jordan. I've said this before. Michael Jordan got asked why he never came out politically. And he said, because Republicans buy sneakers too. That was his answer. And that's sort of the vibe of the media.
I'm going to circle around to a comment that I saw much earlier when we were talking about David Seymour saying, we can't insert ourselves into this. And look, part of the comment had a bit of truth, right? Who cares what New Zealand says? Right? Is Israel going to pay any attention to us? Is Hamas going to notice? Are the people of Gaza going to notice? Probably not, right? So why do it is not the question. The question there is why not? Like, it's certainly saying to something about what we stand for as a country, as a whole.
And think of our history. Nuclear-free New Zealand, 1981 Springbok 2. We have this little country of ours has this history of going, no, even though we're only a little country, we still do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of comment, whenever we're talking about what we do with climate change, or we're too small, no one cares what we think, that sort of thing. We know that that's not true. People do know we exist, and we tend to punch above our weight on a lot of things. I think where we stand, we need to say something to the Palestinians that live here, that have family still over there, to say, as a country that has usually stood up, not always, but usually stood up for things that are right. We believe this to be the right way. Or we're going to go on the right side of history, then we should be doing that at every opportunity. And the fact that Israel won't care what we think lowers our stakes as well. So we have nothing to lose to stand up and go, we think hucking artillery rounds into a small area jam-packed with 2.5 million people, over half of which are children, is probably a massive overreaction, and everybody needs to chill out.
I want to share with you now another 60 seconds of Cenk's conversation. Planner Walks said something really interesting though, which we'll share as well, because we talked last week about it's the others that make things bad. When we do it, it's okay. When we drop a bomb on Hiroshima, we're heroes. When you kill hundreds of thousands of people on your side, then you're war criminals. And as Planner Walk said, sure, Germany committed war crimes in World War II, but it's a war. Yeah, it's a war. Very, very true. So this is a little bit, and there's some not graphically visual stuff in here, but I guess trigger warning if I need to do that. Cenk explains a little bit from reading it on CNN, reputable sources, what's happened, what Israel's doing at the moment to the people of Gaza in this clip. Have a listen.
Dropping bombs on residential buildings. 50 ambulances have been hit. 10 out of 25 hospitals don't operate anymore. The incubators are about to run out of energy. There's 45 babies that might die today. The parents I just read on CNN are writing the names of the kids on their calves, on their legs, so that if they are killed in a bombing and they're mutilated, they could find their bodies. Imagine writing the name of your child on their legs so that you could find them in the rubble after Israel or any government drops a bomb on them. And I need the West to understand something. Bombs kill people. And do you know how they kill people? They incinerate them alive, or their heads explode. So what happened in Israel was a disaster and disgusting. But you have to be equally honest and equally outraged at the immorality of incinerating babies and grandmothers and aunts and uncles, which is what we're doing right now. America cannot keep sending aid for death and destruction. Enough of the occupation. End it today. End it today. It's monstrous. Okay.
There you go. So some pretty graphic things in there, writing the names of their children on their legs in case they get, I guess, a building falls on them, and babies about to die potentially when they lose the last of their power because they're in incubators in hospital.
I'm going to bring up one other thing as well. I think New Zealand has a responsibility to that area. Would it surprise you, Pat, if I said that we don't have clean hands on the war crime front in Palestine?
It would surprise me.
So in World War I, some of our soldiers massacred an entire village of Palestinians as a collective punishment for a soldier getting murdered in another village.
Wow.
So I think we have a responsibility. I think palming it off going, we don't have a government, is it appropriate, we're not ready yet, all of this sort of stuff just does not play with me. I believe that our current foreign minister and the presumptive foreign minister should get on the fucking phone and come out with a joint statement that there needs to be a ceasefire. I don't see why that is at all controversial or at all hard to do.
I agree with you, but it is an interesting position now that Nanaia Mahuta has lost that election and is out of government. So this comes almost full circle back to the start of our conversation, just purely from the logistics of it, of a caretaker government. I mean, is Nanaia Mahuta, who's lost that seat, actually still foreign minister? Or are the only people in the caretaker government MPs who actually got re-elected? And vice versa, does that mean, therefore, that the young MP who beat her, Hannah, I forget her surname, sorry, Mapia Clark, is that right? Anyway, does that mean that she is actually already in government because she won the seat, or will have to wait to be sworn in? So this is the thing logistically about a caretaker government and what can it do? And I don't know.
Well, I mean, my understanding is a caretaker government, as you said, can't ram through a whole bunch of laws. It is just like hold steady until the new government comes out. But that doesn't mean that our apparatus of government is paralyzed. Like, that's why there is a caretaker government. That's why they're not all on holiday at the moment.
Yep.
Right? Something in the international scene happens and we can make a statement. Someone's not going unilaterally, we're sending the New Zealand Defence Forces to Gaza. It's just a joint statement from the outgoing foreign minister and the incoming foreign minister.
Yeah,
we're both on the same page here. This is a bad time. I think it's important.
And you are stuck in the situation that Raywin points out, and I don't know too much about Luxon's positions yet, but as an evangelical Christian, I'd have a pretty good guess as to what he's going to say about that. All right. Hey, we're going to go into the last part of the show now. It's a pre-recorded conversation with Professor Jonathan Boston, talking about ACT wanting to cut 15,000 staff out of kind of core public sector services. Jonathan is a what's the word? Emeritus professor is the word from University of Wellington, Victoria, or Victoria University of Wellington, whatever they've changed their name to. And he's been criticised by David Seymour today, so he has a chance to respond to that. I play him some audio, and we talk a little bit about the government being run like a business as well. That's in the conversation coming up right now. Chewy, if you want to hang, you can hang. If you're tired and knackered and you want to go, I can look after this myself. And what do you want to do? You can say goodbye to the folks now, or are you going to hang around?
I think I'll say bye-bye now, because sleepy potato.
All right. So Chewy, we'll see Chewy tomorrow night from 9 o'clock. I'll see you at the end of this conversation between myself and Jonathan Boston. And I know it's kind of weird because I've got the wrong cap on. I normally match my caps when I do a pre-record. I know, poor of me. But we'll catch you tomorrow. Unwatchable. We'll catch you tomorrow from 9, Chewy. And for the rest of you, here's a conversation with Professor Jonathan Boston, and I'll see you in about 20 minutes to wrap up the show. Hooroo.
Cheers, fam.
Welcome to the show, Professor Jonathan Boston, who is the chair of the School of Government, Victoria University. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Pat. I just say I have a chair, but I'm not the chair.
Okay, I was going to say, we often talk to professors and academics and teachers. Yes. And what is your role within the school as chair?
So I'm now an emeritus professor, Pat. So I retired from full-time work at the beginning of last year. I'm on a part-time fixed-term contract.
So you get in and help them sort things out when they need it, because you're the guy who knew everything from last year, that sort of thing, the fixer.
Well, sometimes.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. I very much wanted to talk to you because you've been in the press in the last few days talking about, I don't know whether we call it ACT policy or David Seymour's policy, or just the policy or the idea about reducing the number of public servants by 15,000 people. And you've been voicing some concerns about that. Maybe you could start off by just giving us a bit of a synopsis of what are your concerns about the idea of dramatically reducing the number of public servants?
So the first thing for people to recognize is that when we talk about the public sector, in the broad sense, we're talking around about 400,000 people that work for the central government. And within that, there are approximately 60,000 who work for what's sometimes called the core public sector or the public service. And that consists of about 40 government departments, departmental agencies, interdepartmental executive boards, and so on. So it's this smaller part of the total public sector that has been the subject of some discussion in recent days. The ACT Party, for example, has proposed that public service should be cut back to its levels in 2017, which was around 47,000 employees on a full-time equivalent basis. The National Party has suggested there should be a cut of around 600 million in the 6 billion or so that's currently spent on the core public sector. So that's actually about 10%, not allowing for inflation. So both those numbers are pretty big. Now, what people need to think about is this. First of all, what's magical about 47,000? Well, there's nothing. We can shift people in and out of the core public sector by changing the nature of the organizations for which they work. So, for example, there are currently 9,000 people who work for corrections. That's a government department. They run prisons. Well, prisons could be run by a Crown entity in the way that our health system is. That would shift, probably 8,000 people at least out of the core public sector and put them in the wider public sector. Well, would that achieve anything? Probably not much, but it would certainly reduce the numbers in the core public sector. So key point, first of all, is focusing on an arbitrary number of people who work in a particular part of the public sector, in my view, has little merit. The next thing we have to think about is,
just on that, I think, and I don't know how you can address this, so I'll just say it. The merit in that is for a political party can say, this government has been ridiculous. They didn't need to do what they did. We're going to go back to what it was before. That was better. That's their merit in it, not that they're saying it as bluntly as I am. What you're saying is there's no merit in the outcomes they tell us about. But theirs is a political narrative saying that Labour bad, national better before Labour, let's go back to national. That's what it feels like to me.
Sure, and there's also the narrative that smaller is is beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't necessarily beautiful. If we went back, say, 12, 13 years ago, we had only 2 mining inspectors working for the Department of Labour. And the Commission of Inquiry into the Pike River mine disaster highlighted that that was totally inadequate. And if there had been more people working to oversee the regulation of the mining industry in the country, we may well not have lost 30 people.
Yeah,
so
that's fascinating, Jonathan. We
always...
often give the argument about big and small government. Not that's a great argument. I'll remember that one or that example. But we often say the Gulf of Mexico, the BP oil rig that went up, they had 1 oil inspector in that region.
Sure.
And so that would have been an incident where, or a time where more government, bigger government would have been better, i.e., more inspectors. And our bed bag. What do you say? What's that word? Anyway, what we try and get out there quite a lot. Benchmark will do. Is the argument of smaller government is almost as stupid as the argument that bigger government is better. What we want is better government. Better
Absolutely.
government is better.
I'm not in favour of big government for the sake of big government. Absolutely not. We want a public sector that fulfills the objectives that it's there to fulfil as efficiently, effectively, as honestly and so on as it can. But there's no sort of one right number of people or indeed 100%. One right number of dollars. Now, just very quickly, in terms of 47,000, many people at that time within the public sector thought that the public sector was starved of capability and capacity at the time, which is one of the reasons why it has expanded since. Secondly, there's been a 10% increase in the country's population. We've gone from 4.8 million to 5.2 million, rising rapidly. In those sorts of circumstances, you would expect, other things being equal, for the public sector and indeed the public service, the smaller part, to expand somewhat as well. Now, it's obviously expanded in the case of the public service more than 10% in the last 6 years. But I, for one, wouldn't want to suggest some, quote, right number.
Yeah. And also, what's happened in the last 3 years that might have caused those services to expand? A little thing called COVID. There's been cyclones. There's been all sorts of things that might... Yes. I'm sure public service in 1939 was a lot less than what it was in 1945 for some little things that were happening around the world.
Absolutely. And that's one of the points I've made in some of the interviews I've been doing, which is that we need a public service that's going to be capable of managing the kinds of challenges and risks that we face now, not those that we face, say, in 2017, but what we face now and what are coming at us from the future. And gosh, we've got no shortage of really big challenges, massive, technological changes happening and on the horizon, massive geopolitical changes internationally, massive changes on the horizon in terms of demography, and of course all the huge ecological challenges. So, as citizens, certainly speaking now as a citizen, I want a public service that can protect the public interest and do a good job, not right just now, but that's important, but also for the future in terms of what challenges we're going to have to meet.
It sounds like what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they've picked an arbitrary figure of 15,000 people or 47,000 total, which means nothing. And I get the sense that you would say something like, if it was fair, let's assess how many we need and then start at that point rather than just picking the arbitrary figure of 47,000. Because, maybe there would be some out of the health system that would be okay to move on because COVID's tailing down. But just to pick that arbitrary number sounds like that's one of your concerns. Why that arbitrary number?
Absolutely. If we want to do this in a rational way, we have to decide what it is that we want the public sector to do.
Yeah.
And then what sort of resources it's going to need, what kind of capability it's going to need in order to fulfill those objectives. And then you can get down to the nitty-gritty of, well, just how many people actually do you need to employ or contract with or buy services from the private sector from in order to achieve the objectives you want to achieve. So just plucking a number out of the atmosphere or out of the, out of the past is not a rational way, in my view, of deciding how to govern well.
What I hear you saying is a little bit like I just said, better government is better. We want better government, not necessarily bigger, not necessarily smaller, just better.
Yes.
Yes. What I'd like to do is play for you some audio now, because David Seymour himself was asked on a radio show this morning if your concerns, so what your concerns are, which is why I asked you about your concerns first of all, had any legitimacy. And this is what David Seymour, this is how he answered. This is 90 seconds for us to listen to.
No, I don't. Just not to be a know-it-all, but it's actually about 28-29% increase in the core public service. It's really important just to differentiate. We're not talking about cops. We're not talking about teachers or nurses or doctors or corrections officers or anyone other than people that work in core agencies. So you look at MB, Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment, gone up from about 3,500 to 5,800. Another 2,300 people working in there. But if you talk to anyone who's actually trying to run a business, you say, gee, has your life got easier? Has it got easier to run a business? Because, you've had about a 2/3 increase in the number of MB bureaucrats. No. Ministry of Education, 2,500 when Labor came in. Now about 4,400, nearly doubled in size. The Ministry of Education, every principal I talk to, and in the Epsom electorate, I try and meet every principal every year. 30 of them, and they never tell me that life's getting easier because the Ministry of Education's expanded. So, he's just wrong if he thinks that we need all of these extra people. The government functioned perfectly well with 15,000 fewer bureaucrats in 2017, and I think a starting point should be to get back to that. And if they say there's a whole lot of stuff we can't do anymore, well, maybe we need to start asking ourselves, is it really necessary to do it?
So that's a pretty ominous thing as well. Basically, him saying, if they're not, if they're not going to work, let's just get rid of them altogether. I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that unmolested to start with, Jonathan. But I do have a few questions about what he said as well.
Sure.
Do you want to respond to anything that he said, because that was actually directed at you?
Sure. Some of what he's saying is perfectly reasonable. We do need to be asking ourselves the question regularly: do we need to undertake these particular tasks or not? Do we? May there be better ways to do what it is that we think needs to be done? Those are perfectly reasonable questions. So I don't disagree with all that he was saying. I would part company on one or two matters. The first is he was suggesting that corrections officers are not part of the core public service. Well, actually, they are. Corrections is our largest government department. It is part of the core. So it's not to be linked with the education system or the healthcare system.
So let me ask you something on that then. If they're core, we hear Mr. Luxon talking about the core services need to reduce by 6.5%. So in your estimation, does that include corrections, therefore, because they are core?
Well, if you were applying that rule uniformly across all government departments, then yes. Wow. But of course, if you listen to what Christopher Luxon and David Seymour are saying, they're making it quite clear that there are areas where they think there needs to be some expansion in the public service / public sector. So, for example, David Seymour thinks we should be spending more money on prisons. We should have more people in prison. He thinks we should be spending more money on the Defence Force. Now, look, he's absolutely entitled to those views, and he may well be, Minister for Corrections or Minister for Defence. But we have to recognise that if we were to cut significantly in some areas of the public sector, or indeed the public service, the narrow bit, there will be consequences for what it is that we're able to do.
I specifically want to get your opinion. I mean, you don't know, lucky for you, lucky for most of us, what's going on in David Seymour's head. But he seems to think, he was talking about, well, are businesses happier with extra workers at MBIE? Will principals, are they getting a better outcome with more people in the education department? But what he's not saying is, when we reduce the numbers, business will operate better. When we reduce the numbers, principals will be happier. So it's kind of this false equivalency that they're not saying they're happy, therefore I must get rid of these people, because maybe this euphoric state of 2017, all principals were happy and all businesses, they were able to run efficiently. But now that there's new public servants, all of a sudden they're struggling to run their businesses, and the principals aren't telling me they're happy. I mean, to me, that feels again like another political narrative, another bait and switch, because he's not saying to us, when we remove these people, we'll be back in that Shangri-La and everything will be wonderful again.
Yes. Well, I mean, a really critical issue here, Pat, is how do we assess performance?
Yeah.
And again, I go back to the question, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Is it making principals happy? Is that an objective? I wouldn't have thought that was a primary objective of our education system. Is making business people happy? Is that a primary objective of the public service or the public sector? I rather doubt it. David Seymour is entitled to his view that these are important ways of assessing the quality of government, but I would beg to differ with him. I think there are rather more important and objective ways of assessing outcomes. As far as business is concerned, there are things that governments do that will necessarily make businesses unhappy from time to time.
Yeah.
They have to pay taxes. They have to conform with various health and safety regulations. They have to conform with various environmental regulations. Many business people find that really frustrating, and I can understand that. If I was running a business, I'm sure I would feel the same. But I wouldn't be judging the success of the government's regulatory machinery on the basis of whether people are happy or unhappy. That's just ridiculous. I'm sorry.
I'd like to play one more piece of audio for you. It's only about 60 seconds, but it's something we've been talking about here in BHN for the whole election cycle and before. And it's this idea of telling us we're going to have a government run like a business. Now, I have huge concerns with that, but let me play you the 60 seconds or so here where in this morning's interview, David Seymour spoke about what's going to happen when we start running the country like a business. As a bit of a preface to what's going to be said in just a second.
Chief executives of government departments should have a contract with the minister and key performance indicators and performance pay. So if you're the chief of the Ministry of Social Development, you're responsible for giving out about $30 billion in pensions and benefits. We want to see people getting off benefits into work and staying in work. But if you, the chief executive of MSD, you don't actually get paid more in return for getting people off work, off benefits into work. You don't really get paid less if more people are on benefits for longer, which is what's happened. Now, we've said that person should have a really clear contract, and just like the chief executive of any company on the NZX 50 should get paid more if they perform and maybe fired if they don't. Jonathan Boston is in the paper this morning saying, if we're hiring people that respond to financial incentives, we're hiring the wrong people. They should be there for the public spiritedness of serving the nation and the government and the community. Well, it all sounds like great stuff, but that's not how business works. And it's not how human nature works, and it hasn't worked for the taxpayer either.
It's not how business works, but we've been banging our heads against the wall saying running a country is not a business. So I agree that's not how business works, but a country is not a business. And this idea of monetizing outcomes. Now, my father was involved in the insurance company. I'm not saying he was dodgy, but the insurance company's been proven, especially in America, to be very dodgy for a long time, that if they can deny your claim, the person can get money from it. So it's monetized to have a negative outcome for the people. If what they're saying is that the head of WINS is going to have a better outcome if fewer people are getting benefits, that's a monetizable way that the customer could end up suffering significant harm if the wrong person was in that position. And I'm just really concerned that if you were to run a country like it was a business, for example, you'd get rid of all the libraries. They're not profitable. You'd start charging for things like police, if you're going to the nth degree of neoliberalism. But I don't quite understand. You've said it very clearly. He repeated what you were saying about, it's a service. We're providing a service. Services don't in turn necessarily provide a profit. They provide a service first. Is it a genuine concern? And what are we going to need to look out for to not allow the country to start being run like a business? Or is that something that that we could?
Gosh. Well, Pat, I mean, this raises some very fundamental issues of an ethical and philosophical nature. The first is, of course, what is the difference between the public sector and the private sector, and indeed what should be the difference? If there are commercial
profit,
activities,
isn't it? Isn't it profit? If you're running a business, you're making a profit and giving a dividend either to yourself or to your shareholders. If it's a public service, it's a service, which means you're providing a return to the public. That's the difference, isn't it?
Well, I wish it was as simple as that, Pat. I mean, within the sort of business community and people who think about the roles and responsibilities of the business community, there are many who would argue that businesses have roles in addition to being profitable. They include having a sense of social responsibility and environmental responsibility, for example. And moreover, there's a concern that we should be not merely incentivizing short-term profitability, but long-term profitability. And sometimes there's a conflict between the short and the long term. And there's a huge amount written about that in relation to the private sector and indeed the public sector. Now, another key point here would be to say that, of course, incentives matter, and that includes financial incentives. But when it comes to the most senior public servants, and that's what I was talking about, to which David Seymour was responding, when it comes to the most senior public servants, it's actually, first of all, difficult to assess performance in a rigorous, anyway, quantitative way. And secondly, if I'm making an appointment of a departmental chief executive, I want that person to be working 24/7 for the benefit of the nation, my government, and the people that department is there to serve, regardless of whether there's a financial incentive or not. In other words, I want that person working really well, not because they're going to get some additional increment to their salary if they appear to have done really well according to some specific performance criteria that someone's come up with, yeah. but because they have a wholehearted desire to serve the public well, to serve the government well, and so forth. So the next thing to say is there's absolutely no evidence that I'm aware of that would indicate that senior public servants actually perform better when there is performance-based remuneration. If someone can provide some really robust evidence on that to the contrary, I'd be very keen to see it. And then, you know, there's a downside to performance-based remuneration for the very senior public servants, and that is this. We want people in that senior role to be providing the best possible advice to ministers without fear or favour. Mm-hmm. To be able to tell ministers point blank, Minister, I think you're wrong about that. If you really want to do this, then this would be a better way of doing it than what you're suggesting, and so on. If chief executives think that their pay might be at stake if they tell the truth to their minister, yeah, then a very fundamental constitutional convention, namely that these people should provide free and frank advice, risks being undermined. And I think that would be very, very unfortunate.
Really good point to finish on. Thank you very much, Emeritus Professor from Victoria University, Jonathan Boston. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure, Pat. Happy to talk again sometime. I'm sure these issues won't go away.
All right, team, there we go. That is us. And as you know, Chewy cut out. He cut out on us, didn't he? Cut out on us. Can I say a huge thanks to Gordon and to Dave, who have purchased some Big 18 merch tonight. Remember, this is a way that you can, gosh, what did I just do there? This is a way that you can get behind us if you want. We're going to be running this merch drop just until next week, which means this week being a short week, it will be available till then. And our topical gear for this week is, or this month, is bottom feeders, and then also the general BHN merch is there as well. How it works if you're new to us is you come along, you place your order. We order from the printer on the Friday of each week. We get it hopefully on the Monday, Tuesday of each week, and then we send it out on the Wednesday, Thursday the following week. So in an ideal world, you've got it by Friday of the following week from what you've ordered it from. That's if you get your order in before 9 a.m. Friday. I noticed there was an order that came in last Friday at about midday. So if you ordered after 9 a.m. last Friday, then it'll be through in this week's order. Fantastic. Thank you very much for being a part of what we've done. Also, big thanks to Leonard. Leonard wanted to make sure we shared his view, which was Seymour. I'm sorry, if you're in the audio podcast right now, I apologize about making that noise in your ear holes. But Seymour has sent us, Leonard Craig Kendrick has sent us the word Seymour with a couple of sick emojis next to it. So thank you for the super chat, Leonard, of $2. We appreciate that. And I apologise again to the people who are listening, listening to the audio podcast, because you just got me making throw up noises. I was giving an audio version to the icon, the emoji that was on that situation. All right, guys. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow night. Of course, one of the big news stories for this week, and some of you will roll your eyes. I appreciate that. But one of the big news stories for this week is the Rugby World Cup final. So hopefully on Thursday night, we'll have Nigel Yeldon come and join us. He is a former employee of News Talk ZB and Radio Sport. He's a rugby commentator off Sky Sport, and he has his own sort of independent sports network at the moment. He'll be joining us on Thursday. I just had a look while we were talking there, actually. Bombers podcast tonight looks like it's got Seymour. And like I told you, Seymour's doing everything. Go to the opening of a paper bag. Seymour, Hooton, and obviously Damien Grant on that. So we might have a look to see if anything was interesting said in there for tomorrow night, as well as more of your interactions. And we look forward to hearing more of your thoughts as well. The next couple of weeks is going to be sort of a bit slower for New Zealand news, just because until we really find out about what's happening with the final election situation, a couple of the parties, New Zealand First and National, have kind of gone to ground, and Labour's licking its wounds. We are keeping an idea on everything. We're keeping an eye on everything for you, but just to be aware, that's probably going to be the next couple of weeks as well, looking what's happening in New Zealand, and also keeping an eye especially on Gaza and Israel, and also potentially some stuff from around the world as well. All right, team, that's us for tonight. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate you all. Love you to bits, and we will see you tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Remember, as it says on the screen here, subscribe to our daily audio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Search for hashtag BHN or Big Hairy News, and that will get you to find us. We have been regularly in the top 5 podcasts on the Apple charts for news commentary in New Zealand. Great place to be. We really want to stay there. If you haven't had a chance to listen to us on the audio podcast, I recommend it. I think we're better when you can't see our faces. I think that's the truth, actually. And also, we upload clips there as well. So each of the segments that we do, like that interview we did tonight with the professor, that'll be uploaded as a clip probably in a couple of days' time, so you don't get it on the same day. You can listen to the whole show. And through the weekend, the reason we do a daily audio podcast is we always put clips up there in the weekend for you guys to check out and listen to in case you've missed us. Great thing about the audio podcast, it means you can, like if you miss half the show or you miss a show, you can listen to it as you're driving to work tomorrow morning and catch up with what we've been going on and on and on about the night before. And if you are already subscribed to us, a rate and a review would be amazing. We had I made an entry today for the New Zealand Podcast Awards, and I used 3 of the comments that people had reviewed us from, because part of the entry form, it says if you like, you could put in some comments and some reviews from your listeners. So I put some of your guys' comments into the actual award. So welcome to review us and comment and rate us as well, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. Helps us with the algorithms. All right, that's enough of a sales pitch for today. Thank you for being with us this evening. We will catch you tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Until then, my friends, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, good night.